Good afternoon, everyone. It is the Ask the Expert session for the Develop Windows apps on and for a rich ecosystem of platforms and devices. I apologize in advance for how long that title was, but we were trying to obscure and hide all reference to ARM because we wanted to deliver a worthy news item to you at Build this year. I'm Rich Turner. I'm a Senior Product Manager lead on the Windows team, and I have with me a collection of my colleagues who together have helped deliver most of the ARM announcements that you've seen over the last couple of 48 hours now of Build, with ARM native versions of Visual Studio, .NET Framework, Visual C++, and a new ARM-based, ARM-powered development device with Project Volterra, and also our ARM emulation technology, and of course our ARM services in the sky with Azure VMs, and later in the year news about our CI/CD offerings from Azure DevOps and GitHub as well. So we made quite a lot of ARM-related announcements at Build, starting with Satya in the keynote and Panos following that, and then Kevin Gallo during one of the theme sessions in the keynote as well. And then I've just delivered a breakout session discussing this news in a little more detail as well. We have a panel full of people here ready for your questions. So if you'd like to ask those questions, I'm going to act as moderator and read your answers out and assign them to people to answer, and we'll see where we go. So first question from Andre: can I run Windows ARM and Visual Studio 2022 ARM in the future on a MacBook with M1? If yes, does it use Boot Camp? Ultimately, I'll start off by saying this is not a supported scenario. Microsoft does not currently support Windows running on Apple M1s. It is something we hear a lot of requests for, and we obviously reassess and reconsider options periodically, but right now we don't support that scenario. Any other thoughts, any of the team? No one's come off mute. I don't think there's much to add to that one. Pedro's answering in chat there, which is great as well. Thanks, Pedro. So Andre also asks, where can we get sample code for NPU programming? Hey, Fred, I'm going to pass this one over to you. What do you say to that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rich. Hey, hello, everybody. So we predict that there is a lot of attention and questions around what we announced in terms of AI and the AI demo that we showed off around the hybrid loop running AI workloads, both on the NPU, CPU, GPU, and then of course in the cloud and backend Azure. And so we are working on an AI blog, and I will make sure that we address where you can find sample code for NPUs and the requirements around it. For example, if you're working on targeting a Qualcomm, NPU, you need to get the Snappy library and SDK from Qualcomm and such. So we will go collect all this information, put it in a blog in about 3 to 4 weeks to come.
That's awesome. Thanks, Fred. And Jamshed, you have a little bit to add as well from the .NET side of the house too.
Yeah, so we have folks working on putting that together at the moment, so we should be able to piggyback on the blog that Fred just alluded to and get some information into it there.
Fantastic. Yeah, it'd be great to be able to see opportunities for both native app developers as well as .NET developers be able to utilize the NPU on existing Pro X's as well as the upcoming Project Volterra device as well. So looking forward to making this as available as possible to as many people as possible is a good thing. Okay. Next question, Mr. Sinclair. Can we expect many of the Microsoft apps to be ARM native going forward? That is a great question, and I'm going to throw this one to Pedro to get us started.
Hi, there's definitely been a lot of progress for the first-party applications, and I appreciate Stephen Cooper coming on in the chat. Office has been ported to ARM64EC, so it runs natively, and because it has been ported to ARM64EC, it can also run x64 plugins when it's running. And of course, those plugins will run emulated, but the core of Office has been ported. OneDrive, it was like a big request. It was also ported. I can't think of Visual Studio, of course. I mean, this Visual Studio has been one of the things, and the .NET framework have been things that from the very beginning we really wanted to have ported to ARM64 native, and we're delivering that with this version of Windows and Visual Studio. So that's great. And well, Edge from the very beginning. Thank you, Stephen. That's right.
Awesome. Anything else to add, Stephen? Are there other things that you're aware of that we should add to the list of what we've already got ported, and what may be something? Is there anything that is on the way that we can mention? I don't know.
I'm not sure at this point. I know there's lots of stuff from third parties that are also pointed to ARM native, and that's great to see. But the big most used applications from Microsoft are all ported to ARM now for productivity.
VS Code, I almost forgot. Yes.
VS Code, of course. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, ironically, the Electron app engine essentially was ported to target ARM64 a while ago. So VS Code and Teams, that both are built as Electron apps, have actually both supported Windows on ARM for quite a while. Along with all of these tools as well, along with Visual Studio, the development environment that we all know and love, and the .NET infrastructure that sits beneath it. Also, the Visual C++ toolchain is also being ported to ARM64 natively as well. So your C++ compiler, linker, and all the rest of those tools are being made available as ARM64 native binaries themselves as well. So while you can also use those, the x64 binaries on an x64 PC to spit out ARM binaries and copy those built binaries over to a target machine, in the future, and starting now, essentially, you'll be able to use the new ARM64 versions of those compilers to be able to build on the ARM device as well as run on that same ARM device and omit the copying back and forth experience, which can be a bit frustrating for high productivity environments. I will also say that in the Windows world, most of Windows is already compiled to ARM64. Most of the inbox apps that ship as part of Windows are already ARM64. Windows Terminal, for example, from day one when we started the Windows Terminal project, I used to annoy the heck out of the team by demanding an ARM build as well. So Windows Terminal supports ARM64 out of the box, as does Windows Subsystem for Linux. So you can go and install Ubuntu and SUSE and a bunch of Linux distros on top of WSL and have all of those run natively and pure ARM code as well. You can see those in the demos that we showed in the breakout just now, where we showed Windows Terminal and the command line demo that Kayla gave us. Running ARM64 in the task managers. So lots of stuff on the way, and we fully expect, yes, that now that we're delivering these developer tools, this was the whole point of delivering these ARM native developer tools, was that more and more app developers will now find it much easier to build and deliver ARM64 native versions of their Windows apps. And so we should start seeing a significant increase, I think, in the coming months and years as more and more apps ported to target ARM natively, which would be great. Okay, moving on to the next question. Let's see. Will Windows containers have an ARM image? I can share that, yes, I've been working with the Azure team, the team that are building an ARM64 VM infrastructure. They are also working on releasing an Azure Kubernetes service to enable you to use ARM containers within your Kubernetes setup as well. So that is on the way for a preview. The VMs are currently still in preview as well, and once they stabilize, they're going to be working towards getting that to GA as soon as possible, so that you can use them in your production environments as well. Next question, Sylvain. This one I think is a Jamshed. When .NET Framework 4.8 for ARM64 will be available, should we recompile .NET Framework applications targeting any CPU to run without x64 emulation, or the .NET Framework CLR for ARM64 will be available to use the current IL on ARM? So ultimately, this is, do I have to rebuild my ARM applications even if they're targeted as any CPU, or should I just expect them to run ARM native without any modifications? Over to you, Jamshed.
Sure. Thanks, Rich. So there is a subtle difference here on how things behave for .NET Framework versus .NET Core. So I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind first. In the case of .NET Framework, binaries that are built today, say using .NET 4.7.2 or 4.8, targeting 4.7.2 or 4.8 as any CPU, will run emulated if not retargeted for x64. But if you're running applications that are targeted for .NET Core versions, any CPU binaries do run natively on an ARM64 device and with no changes. So if you're using Framework, you do need to change your target to x64, but you do not need to change the target version to 4.8.1. You could keep your version what it is, and as long as the architecture is retargeted to the build config changes to ARM64, you should be able to then run using a 4.8.1 runtime on ARM64. It'll run natively.
That's great. Thanks for the info. Any other thoughts anyone wants to add on this front? Just looking at my merry band of willing victims here. Pedro, you have thoughts?
So one of the things that is important with this, first of all, thank you, Jamshed, for responding. One of the things that is important about the AnyCPU thing is that some applications out there, they package AnyCPU executable and a bunch of DLLs that are actually x64 DLLs. If you install that application and all of a sudden Windows starts running AnyCPU executables as ARM64, they wouldn't be able to load those DLLs, and of course the application would fail. So for that compatibility reason, that's the reason why we keep AnyCPU executables running as x64 under emulation. However, we're working on a few things that allow you to override this. We already have a registry key and a create process parameter. They haven't been documented that, but we're rushing to have those documented. So in that way, if you have an executable that is AnyCPU, just like before, no recompilation, your bootstrap code can create that process as ARM64. If your setup is sure that that's a possibility. So that's pretty much the tools we are kind of working on documenting those.
That's great. Thanks, Pedro. Okay, question from Mary Branscombe. Hi, Mary. What will be the situation for Windows on licensing, image ISO availability, or VM CI/CD and so on? We will be sharing details later in the summer in terms of licensing and acquisition of both the Volterra device as well as other options in terms of ISO availability, VMs, etc. So stay tuned for some more news later in the summer on that front. Okay, so Hayden, are there any plans to make the NPU accessible to Linux workloads via WSL, similar to GPU acceleration today? That's a great question. Pedro, do you have any thoughts on this? So accessing the NPU on an ARM device from within WSL, from a Linux distro running within a WSL.
I honestly don't have any data on that at the moment. I hope that we're going to implement that the same way as we do for x64, but I don't have any information for that at the moment.
Right. So Hayden, who, for anyone who's not aware, is one of our leading community and professional Linux specialists who's been helping us enormously with WSL. So thank you for all your work in the past, Hayden. Yes, I would absolutely like to see us be able to expose the NPU to the VM in which WSL runs. However, I don't have any firm plan details on that just yet, but I would totally expect that we'll be looking at that at some point. It's just not on the immediate calendar for right now. But obviously, once we start getting these things established, that need will become increasingly real. So I totally expect that would arrive eventually. Mary Branscombe, how will ARM64 EC fit into the end-to-end tooling and CI/CD story? Steve, do you want to take this one? Or Jamshed or Mark, whoever wants to take that one. Who wants to put a hand up? Oh, Steve, you muted. Steve, you're muted. Oh.
I think Mark
Yeah.
might be the best one to talk about at least the experience inside of Visual Studio, and Jamshed then the tooling, I think.
Okie doke. I mean, ultimately, I think, Mark, when in Visual Studio, I was just actually playing around with this the other day when I was recording the demos for Build. I was noticing that you can add new build targets for your project, one of which might be ARM64EC, for example, so that you can build applications that can that are primarily built for ARM, but can also incorporate x64 DLLs and libraries and so on. Is there anything in addition, you think, that from a Visual Studio perspective that you'd want to add to that experience?
So we haven't got any. I think those, you kind of named them really in terms of what we have right now. Essentially, you're selecting your build targets, but as of right now, that's all we've got. But just to be very clear, I mean, the direction we've taken has really been community driven. So what we're really encouraging is people start to think about the scenarios that they want most. Let us know. We have a thread that, frankly, that Rich has been shepherding for the last 9 months or so. It might be even longer than that, where we have kind of been trying to figure out what developers exactly want in their experiences. So if there's specific things that we've kind of, as our initial kind of rollout happens, if there's things that we think we've missed that we should have reprioritized and needs to be kind of bubbled up to the top, talk about it on these forums, give us the feedback we need, and we'll kind of reassess ourselves and kind of make sure the priority kind of moves in that direction.
That, you make a really good point, actually. This is something that people outside of Microsoft don't necessarily realize, but the amount of time and effort we spend trying to directly respond to customer feedback and customer asks is vast across most of the product groups. So if you want to see something in Visual Studio, if you want to see something in Windows and so on, get us the feedback. Feedback Hub is a great way to even offer suggestions. You don't have to use Feedback Hub to report issues. Visual Studio also has its own feedback mechanism as well. So use the channels available to ask the product teams to consider your asks as well as the issues that you're bumping into and so on, because that feedback, we try and route that feedback to the teams with the most ability to actually deliver fixes and improvements to address that feedback. And we live and die by that feedback. So we can't always guarantee to deliver all of it, but we do our very best to deliver as much as we can. A good example here is, as Mark mentioned, this entire effort to bring ARM native Visual Studio to market was driven from a series of observations and, by and large, by a discussion thread on the Visual Studio forums, where people were asked, would you be interested in an ARM native version of Visual Studio? And it turned into one of the most engaging threads on the forum. So enormous thanks to everyone who's provided thoughts and feedback there. Jamshed, anything in particular from your side in terms of the ARM64EC and CI/CD? I don't think there's
nothing really to add there.
Okay.
Sorry, I was responding to the question about NuGet packages in the chat and I got distracted, but no,
Great.
not sure anything Mark covered it.
Okay, great. But yeah, Mary, ultimately, yes, ARM64EC is definitely an important part of the story. As I mentioned earlier, for those who haven't seen it, it allows you to build an ARM application that essentially is able to load and execute x64 DLLs and libraries and so on at runtime, which is super cool, especially if you have a dependency on a DLL that you might get from a third party who haven't yet ported that to natively target ARM. You can still build an application that runs primarily as ARM, but utilizes the x64 emulation engine to emulate x64 for that dependency upon which your application is built. So very powerful technology and certainly applicable for an awful lot of scenarios. However, again, like with most things, if you can build your app pure native and you can get hold of updated DLLs and dependencies that have been ported natively to ARM, then you know, you're going to get the best performance, the best power consumption, and the best memory footprint and so on out of that native application. So we do encourage native wherever possible, but ARM64EC is a powerful tool for those that need more complex setups. So next question, Hayden. In addition to helping select developer projects run ARM native on Windows, can Microsoft provide guidance for community projects who want to do the same? Yes, absolutely. We've spent, I don't know how much time over the last 6 months or so building this story for Build, discussing how we can best help not just third-party organizations, but also an awful lot of open source and community-driven projects support Windows on ARM. We have, in fact, Jamshed has a team, I'll let him talk a little bit about that, who's helping with a large chunk of this right now. We also have another colleague, Marcus, who's helping drive an engagement with Linaro, which was a company spun off from ARM, which is being sponsored by ARM, Qualcomm, and Microsoft to help go and port things like Python and Git and LLVM and Clang and so on to natively target Windows on ARM. Jamshed, do you want to share a little about what you've been working on as well with our new team?
Sure. I think this also dovetails into another question somebody else asked in the chat, which is what are we doing to make sure packages published in our ecosystem, NuGet packages, VCPKG, these kinds of things are also ARM ready. So like you said, Rich, we have a team that's exclusively focused on the ecosystem. We are looking at packages, so that's top 1,000 downloads on NuGet. We're looking at VCPKG. We are looking at the top controls from our control vendors for .NET, and trying to ensure that all of these things line up. So when we have a tooling story that GAs later this year, applications that use our tools that also rely on these third-party components, libraries, whatever, they're able to leverage native versions of those on ARM64. Yep.
Great. Awesome. Sorry, I'm just checking some of the QA questions that are coming in. Thanks for that, Jamshed. So there's a bunch of questions about Maui. This isn't really the right group to talk authoritatively about Maui, so I would encourage you to direct questions at the Maui team. Many of them are actually hanging out on Twitter as we speak as well, so you should be able to reach them pretty easily there. So let me see, new questions. Not that one. So Andre says, are there any plans for standards to make the an NPU from, for example, Qualcomm or Apple be compatible? Hey, Fred, this sounds like just the kind of question for you.
Hello, Rich. Currently, there are no plans.
Great succinct answer there. Thank you very much.
I suspect that as the industry recognizes how powerful the NPU is, and we actually start building experiences that are contextually aware and taking advantage of AI workloads running on the NPU, I think that organically our industry will start working on standards that kind of align to multiple companies. But at this moment, there are none.
Right. I think it's a good observation to compare where we are with NPUs today with where we were with GPUs way back in the early 90s when I was still not as great as I am now. Back when GPUs were very, very, very different in the way they were architected, they were built, the capabilities they had, and so on. And then we ended up with a software layer like DirectX on Windows, which essentially abstracted away a lot of those very platform-specific capabilities and configurations and architectures behind a more consistent programming layer that enabled Windows developers to build against DirectX and not have to go and make lots of specialist code within their apps and games to be able to utilize each of the different hardware vendors' GPU chipset. I think it's a similar thing for NPUs in that they're very new. No one's really settled, the industry as a whole hasn't really settled on what is the best fundamental shared architecture from at least a 10,000 foot view. Obviously, the implementation of each of those NPUs can be very different internally, but I think we'll see things start to standardize a little bit over the next couple of years, and hopefully we'll have software stacks sitting on top of them, so that you won't have to rebuild your app for different vendors' NPUs every time a new chip comes out. I think, but we'll see. Early days. Just missed that one. Okay, so a question from Anonymous. Will Snapdragon 850 devices ever get x86 64 GPU UMDs, user mode drivers, I'm guessing? Currently 64-bit applications run with Warp instead of GPU, unlike the later 7C, 8C, and 8CX generation. Good question. Good question. As Pedro says, I certainly don't have any visibility into that question. However, we will take note of it, and if we can find some answers, we'll post a blog post that provides some clarity on that front. We're looking at how we can best deliver ARM-related news to the audience via a variety of blog channels. So keep your eye on the Windows Developer blog for now, and we'll post details there of what we're going to do about ARM follow-up. Boom. And then Simon Bisson says, hey, Simon, says Azure Percept is using NPUs on ARM. Are you learning from their experiences? I'm going to hand this one back to you, Fred, as well.
Sure. Again, another succinct answer. I think the quick answer is yes, we're learning. I mean, this is, again, similar. I like Rich's earlier analogy about the GPU and how, you know, that kind of took off a whole new paradigm of how we're going to build these devices and where code runs and stuff. And so, yes, this is new territory for us, but we are learning from them.
Great. Thank you very much. Okie doke. Let's have a look. I think we're out of new questions. If anyone has any other follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to myself on Twitter. I am Rich Turn, RICHTURN_MS. You'll find me, just search for Rich Turner. I'm all over Twitter, so you'll find me easily there. Or my personal Twitter account, if you can handle the dad jokes, is at BitCrazed. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I can funnel questions back to various teams across the company and hopefully get you answers relatively soon. But otherwise, we thank you for your questions and your participation and your support and all of your engagement. We really appreciate it. As I said earlier, you guys have a heck of a voice to be able to help us shape the products that we're building so that they are best suited to what you need them to be. So please continue to get us feedback so that we can work together to build ever-increasing numbers of really powerful and useful tools to help you be productive and effective. But other than that, we shall depart for now. Thanks once again, and enjoy the rest of Build.